Hey class, here we go. So follicle stimulating hormone is the first one I'm going to start with today. And in females, this stimulates ovarian follicle maturation. Follicles are the structures that form inside of ovaries in order to produce oocytes. And when that follicle is maturing, estrogen is also being produced. The other function of FSH is the production of sperm cells in testes of males. Luteinizing hormone is the next hormone. In females, it stimulates ovulation, which is simply the release of the egg from the ovary, or the oocyte from the ovary. And also in males, it stimulates the production of testosterone. So here is showing an ovary. It's white, and this hole right here is where the egg kind of exploded out of the ovary. And that is under the influence of luteinizing hormone. Another hormone is prolactin, and prolactin meaning favoring lactation. Prolactin is produced by the anterior pituitary. It's going to work together with estrogen to promote the growth and also the development of mammary glands in females. And in lactating females, it initiates milk secretion. Now, the hypothalamus is important in making some hormones. Some of the hormones the hypothalamus produces will stimulate the anterior pituitary, and some are produced and then transported to the posterior pituitary where they're stored and released. So the first one is oxytocin. This is produced by the hypothalamus, released by the posterior pituitary. And one of the things that it does is it stimulates uterine contractions during labor. And so when the baby is in position and ready to be born, the stretching of the uterus sends a signal to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus responds by producing this hormone, and this hormone is called oxytocin. And it is released then from the posterior pituitary and then goes to the uterus and contractions occur. So this was an example of positive feedback in 2401. It also stimulates milk ejection or letdown from the breast, and it's important for pair bonding. So you can look back at this picture in your PowerPoint and see those steps I just mentioned, but this is positive feedback. Antidiuretic hormone is another one that's produced by the hypothalamus and then sent to the posterior pituitary. Another term for antidiuretic hormone is vasopressin, called that because it also causes vasoconstriction. But one of the main things that it does for us is it causes our kidneys to reabsorb or keep water in our body. Antidiuretic hormone, by the way, is one that is suppressed when a person drinks alcohol. And so if you think about it, alcohol will cause more urine to be produced, and that's because less antidiuretic hormone is keeping water in. Thyroid hormone, T3 and T4, they are important for your basal metabolic rate. And that is going to be the amount of energy you expend even when you're at rest. We expect that basal metabolic rate to be at a certain point. And this also will increase protein synthesis like growth hormone does. Thyroid hormones also are important for the development of the nervous system. So a baby will get thyroid hormone typically from its mother when it's in utero, but once a baby's born, then it's going to have to start producing its own thyroid hormones. So we see that babies who can't produce thyroid hormones once they're born are at risk for problems with brain development. And we'll get to that with some of the disorders. And then you also see calcitonin. Calcitonin works opposite of parathyroid hormone in that it's going to cause the calcium level in the blood to decrease by being taken up by bone. So here's the thyroid gland, and it's made up of follicles. You can see the purple cells that secrete T3 and T4. For lab, make sure you know and are able to identify the thyroid glands on slides. And for lecture, you want to be able to identify the functions of these endocrine glands. So here is the thyroid gland from behind, and you can also see, if I can move this out of the way, the parathyroid glands. And The parathyroid glands are going to stimulate osteoclasts to reabsorb bone and increase blood levels of calcium. This is an example of a hormone that is secreted by humoral stimulation. In other words, the calcium level in the blood is what causes parathyroid hormone to be produced or inhibited. So if levels of calcium in the blood are low, then parathyroid hormone is produced by the parathyroid gland, and then it's going to cause the osteoclast cells to start breaking bone down and releasing calcium into the blood. The next hormone is produced by the adrenal cortex, and there's several produced there. One of them is aldosterone, and you can remember this one, al at the beginning, al like salt. And so aldosterone is a steroid hormone, but what it does is it causes your kidneys to reabsorb sodium and water follows. Here's the adrenal gland sitting on top of the kidney. And the first part of that adrenal cortex is where aldosterone is produced. So this is also important, aldosterone, for secreting, or in other words, putting into the urine, potassium and hydrogen ions. This is a way of getting rid of excess ions. Another hormone produced by the adrenal cortex is cortisol. These are the glucocorticoids. This is another steroid hormone, and it increases the production of glucose from fats and proteins. We call this gluconeogenesis. That means producing new glucose from something that is not sugar. And so fats and proteins can both be converted into carbohydrates. Cortisol also will enhance epinephrine's vasoconstrictive effects. So epinephrine is going to be a substance that is important for vasoconstriction, and cortisol helps that ensure adequate blood pressure. It also has anti-inflammatory effects, such as the reduction of mast cell numbers and inhibition in the release of histamines. Another kind of hormone that's produced by the adrenal cortex are the adrenal androgens, and these are hormones that are really typically male hormones, but females produce them too, since they do have a adrenal cortex. So one of the actions of this is growth of axillary and pubic hair in females because of the androgens, and then also stimulation of sex drive in women. Androgens also obviously are produced in males, but testosterone is in greater amount in males already. The adrenal medulla produces both epinephrine and norepinephrine. Another term for epinephrine is adrenaline, and in England they still call epinephrine adrenaline. And so the adrenal medulla has actions that are what we call sympathomimetic, in other words, mimicking the sympathetic nervous system. It's not the nervous system, but it is hormones that serve the same as if they were neurotransmitters. So one of the things that epinephrine, norepinephrine can do is increase levels of blood glucose, just like we saw with growth hormone that increases blood glucose. And we'll see with glucagon, which will increase blood glucose, that's made by the pancreas. This one does as well. If you think about fight or flight, like you learned in 2401, then of course when you're scared or if you're going to get ready to run, your heart will beat faster, you'll breathe faster, you need more sugar in your blood, you need better blood flow getting to those essential organs like your heart and brain and lungs and skeletal muscles. The next gland is the pancreas, and you can see it here nestled kind of within the fold of the small intestine, and you notice the pancreas is near the spleen, and here's the kidney. Glucagon is one of the hormones made by the pancreas. Glucagon is going to be important for bringing sugar out, glucose, blood sugar, out of the cells into the blood between meals so your blood sugar remains steady. It works opposite of the insulin. And so one of the things it does is it increases glycogenolysis in the liver. It increases glucose release from the liver and increases blood glucose levels in the blood. And then the other hormone produced by the pancreas in beta cells is insulin. And insulin is usually in greater amount right after a meal, especially a meal high in carbohydrates. And so the actions of insulin will be to cause glucose to move from the blood into cells and then store that glucose as fat. And so you can see it's going to increase lipogenesis, which is the formation of lipids. So overall then, insulin will decrease the amount of glucose in the blood, and glucagon will increase the level of glucose in the blood. The next gland is the pineal gland, and this is one that is important for producing melatonin. And melatonin has the nervous system control because it's really light hitting the eyes that is going to inhibit the amount of melatonin that's produced. Melatonin is important mostly for your sleep-wake cycle or your circadian rhythm. And this term circadian means circa, which is referring to around, and dia, day, so around the day, so about a 24-hour cycle. This is showing the thymus gland. This is the gland that's close to the heart. The thymus gland is important for T lymphocytes, a type of white blood cell, mature. White blood cells are going to have to go there so that they become competent for your immune system. This is a pre-puberty thymus, which is very glandular. And this is showing the post-puberty thymus. And you'll notice, if you look at this one, you can see all of these adipose cells. So it regresses starting in puberty and gets smaller and smaller. So here's the thymus gland, and the thymus gland, this one's pretty large. This is a good one. You can see the lungs and then the heart here. So one way to study hormones, and you got a sheet in lab, but one way to study these will be to maybe write down the name of the hormone, the gland that produces it, some of the functions of it, and at the end of this you're going to see some of the disorders caused by a hypersecretion, which means if you produce too much of this hormone, or a hyposecretion where you don't produce enough of it. So it gives you a chance to write down some of the hormones and then the functions of those hormones and then hyper and hyposecretion. Other hormones you want to know about, other than those that I just covered with you, are produced by organs that are not really considered to be endocrine organs. And these are kind of interesting. So the heart actually produces a hormone. This one is called atrial, which is one of the chambers of the heart. Natriuretic peptide. And if you look at the beginning of this natriuretic, it's not capitalized, but Na, you should know, is the symbol for sodium. So this is made by the heart and controls the amount of sodium and water in the urine. And it tells you it's a peptide hormone. And so what this is going to do is if more water goes out along with salt, it decreases blood volume and decreases blood pressure. This is another hormone that we're going to look at when we get to the cardiovascular system. Another hormone that's produced by an organ that's not really an endocrine gland that we think of is erythropoietin. We're going to look at this with the blood chapter as well. But this is made by the kidney, and it causes an increased production of red blood cells. And this happens when the blood going through the kidney has a low concentration of oxygen. If oxygen levels are lower in the blood, then we need to produce more red blood cells, because it's the red blood cells, or the erythrocytes, that carry oxygen within our blood. So this is a negative feedback mechanism. Renin is another substance produced by the kidney. And what renin does is it's going to cause your blood pressure to increase. And it's initiated by low blood pressure in the kidney. So when the kidney recognizes that blood pressure going through it is low, it produces renin. Renin brings about the production of a substance called angiotensin II, which is a hormone. And we're going to look more at that one too for cardiovascular system. But it does affect your blood pressure. And then also the skin. You learned that in the skin, an inactive form of vitamin D is going to be produced. The production of one that's called calcitriol, and that's the activated form of vitamin D. The skin is kind of like an endocrine gland because it starts the production of that hormone. Here we are at pituitary gland disorders, and I'm going to quickly go through these. You can read about them, but the hyposecretion of human growth hormone will result in pituitary dwarfism. The gigantism example I have here is Robert Wadlow, and he lived in Illinois back in the 1920s. He is here pictured on the right with his family, and a weird picture on the left, but that is his father, and you can see how tall he is there, but that is showing how a pituitary tumor can really influence how much growth hormone there is, and therefore how tall a person would be. He had a growth chart that really showed his growth progressed very quickly, and he actually ended up dying when he was around 22 from neuropathy leading to an infection. This is showing acromegaly in two different individuals. You'll notice the progression on the top is showing a little girl, and then once the growth in length didn't continue anymore, the growth in width did, and you mostly see acromegaly, this hypersecretion of growth hormone, in the facial features in the hands. And there's another example below. Another pituitary gland disorder is one that's called diabetes insipidus. This is not diabetes mellitus, but diabetes insipidus is one where there's a hyposecretion of ADH. If you think about it, ADH causes you to keep water in your body. So if you didn't have that ability, the fluid you took in would all go out and more. So a person with diabetes insipidus can drink up to 20 liters of water a day and then also urinate that much. So this has to be controlled with medication, and like the name implies, it's called vasopressin. That's another name for hormone that we call ADH. Another disorder is that of the thyroid gland, congenital hypothyroidism. So that tells you it's found in a child, and it is caused by a hypothyroidism. Sorry about that. And so when we're looking at this with hypothyroidism, this is going to be one that causes skeletal system stunning, because remember, the thyroid gland is important for growth and development of many glands, one of those being the nervous system, and also the growth and development, organs. So that's all I'm going to go over in this section. If you are writing out your table, go to the next video and I will continue on.